What's going on, everybody? Top 10 Pokemon back, and folks, it's time for my favorite weekly series, the Pokemon Card Auctions of the Week recap. Folks, this past week we saw the continuance, if you will, of insane Black Label card premiums that came by, and also the insane explosion of the Fossil Kabuto card. That's right, I'm sure you've already heard, the common first edition Kabuto card from Fossil set has exploded, becoming over 500% more valuable than it was last week, seemingly overnight. It's insane. There's never a dull moment in this hobby, so please stay tuned till the very end. You're going to love today's recap. A very quick shout out to today's awesome recap sponsor, folks. It is none other than lowpopping.com, your source for high-end investment-worthy Pokemon cards. If you, like myself, are a collector of vintage Pokemon card grails, you need to go check out lowpopping.com, where they have tons of graded Pokemon cards and graded booster packs available, including PSA graded, Beckett graded, and CGC graded cards, as well as numerous autographed cards and sealed video games. And do not forget, if you don't have the cash on hand, you can easily trade for the item or items that you must have for your collection. And you can still make offers on cards above $500, and there are also buy now, pay later options at your disposal as well. Folks, after this recap, please head over to lowpopping.com and check out what they have. I'll put a link to their website in the description of this video. You looking at their stuff supports the channel tremendously, so thank you so much in advance for doing so. Alright folks, to start this recap off with this lot of 216 assorted raw cards in this binder. Folks, there were some serious bangers in this binder. A lot of full art XY cards that go for some serious cash, especially when you can get them in a PSA 10. Like I said, tons of XY era stuff, even some vintage stuff in here, sold for a total of $5,500. However, there are two problems, that I can see when looking at this listing. For one thing, the seller, if you know, you know, right? Another thing, you have no idea what kind of condition these cards are, as there's nothing in the description about the condition of the cards. If you message this seller, trust me, you won't get a response in terms of what the condition is for each of these cards, so your guess is as good as mine. However, this entire binder lot sold for $5,500, so take that as you will. Up next, we saw the complete 2021 25th anniversary McDonald's promo cards. So I'm assuming it's just the McDonald's cards, even though in the picture we see some celebrations cards there at the bottom. I think it's just the 25 cards you got from those Happy Meals. Sold all in PSA 10 for $1,247. Let's take a look at some of the Charizards from Phantasmal Flames. Here is that promo Mega Charizard EX in PSA 10, sold for $1,750. Here is a raw copy of the Gold Hyper Rare Charizard EX that sold for $544, while a PSA 10 copy sold for $3,100 this week. And then we have this SIR Mega Charizard EX that sold as a PSA 10 for $2,301. Up next, we saw a bit of a decline in the Mew EX Chinese exclusive. This card was selling pretty consistently for around $25,000, but for some reason this week came down to $18,400, which is as low as I've seen this card in a little while. We'll keep an eye on it for sure. From Celebrations, we saw another gold medal Charizard come by in PSA 10. This one here sold for $8,100 this week. Here from the Mega Evolution set was this Mega Lucario EX SIR. Sold as a PSA 10 for $480, but then again as a Black Label for $5,100. Showing us that the Black Label premium is a very, very real thing. Speaking of Black Labels, here we have the Moonbreon as a Black Label that sold for $15,600. On to several pieces of sealed product on eBay that came by that were very interesting. From the XY era, we saw this pre-release kit from Evolutions with the Charizard on there that sold for $445, and you do have the potential of getting that pre-release Charizard with the Evolution stamp on it, which can go for a pretty penny. Here we have an XY Evolutions booster box that sold for $1,511. Here's a Primal Clash box that sold for $2,850. And the XY Breakpoint box with all those awesome Gyarados cards in it, sold for $2,629. And then lastly, from the XY era, we saw this Furious Fist box sell for $3,351. From the Sun and Moon era, we saw a Burning Shadows box sell for $952, a Celestial Storm box that sold for $1,671, and then another box that sold for $2,816. Why on earth was there such a price disparity between these boxes? Oh, never mind. And then we saw an Unbroken Bonds booster box sell for $1,891. Here's a Unified Minds booster box that sold for $2,364, a Cosmic Eclipse box that sold for $3,333, and a Team Up Elite Trainer box that sold for $2,185, while the booster box of Team Up sold this week for $7,600. From Sword and Shield, we saw this Fusion Strike box sell for $750. Here is a case of Brilliant Stars booster boxes sold for $2,850. And then the Evolving Skies booster box sold for $2,150. On to some vintage cards on eBay, and let's start off with that Kabuto from Fossil. People have lost their minds trying to get this card. Now, not even a month ago, folks, this card was selling raw for about $2.25 to about $3.25. But now, raw copies have been selling pretty much around the clock for $40. $40. That is an over 500% increase on this card in a few days, really. It's crazy. Here's a lot of what looks to be 25 Kabutos that sold for $490. And the graded cards follow suit. Here is a PSA 9 that was selling a month ago for $18.40. Now PSA 9s are selling for over $100. Here's one for $110. The PSA 10s were selling for $112 not that long ago. Now they are selling for $610. And in the past couple days, we saw 4-figure sales of this card. One for $1,045, another one for $1,025, all the way up to $1,225 for a PSA 10. Folks, do not buy this card for over $1,000. Do not buy this card for over $500. Don't buy this card right now at all, because it is absolutely insanely inflated and hyped up beyond all reason. Please do not buy a first edition Kabuto, whether it's raw or graded. Please don't, okay? Let this storm pass, and let's just laugh about it. Some more vintage cards. Here we saw a PSA 10 First Edition Holo Dragonite from Fossil, sold for $14,300. Along with this First Edition Sabrina's Gengar Holo from Gym Heroes that sold for $14,100. From the Neo series, we saw this BGS 9.5 First Edition Umbreon from Neo Discovery, sold for $7,655. Here's an Unlimited Shining Charizard from Neo Destiny that sold for $7,450. From the E-Series, we saw this BGS 9.5 Mewtwo Holo from Expedition, sold for $4,350. Here's a BGS 9.5 Dragonite, also from Expedition, sold for $8,600. Here's a PSA 7 Crystal Charizard from Skyridge that sold for $7,300. A BGS 9.5 Crystal Lugia from Aquapolis sold for $9,300. And then again as a PSA 8 for $4,550. We saw several Gold Star sales once again. Here's a Japanese Gold Star Gyarados in PSA 10 that sold for $9,200. And then we saw a bunch of Gold Stars that were not 10s that were very interesting. Here's a PSA 7 Gold Star Charizard, sold for $6,400, while the PSA 9 copy sold for $12,100. Here's a PSA 6 Gold Star Rayquaza, that sold for $6,800 this week. Here's a Gold Star Umbreon from the Pop Series 5, sold as a PSA 1. And this puppy is definitely in poor condition, but still sold for $4,250. With those 3 Gold Star cards, pretty much whatever condition you can find them in, they're going for thousands of dollars. A couple of Lugia sales that were very interesting. Here is the Lugia Holo from Unseen Forces. This is the Cosmos Holo in PSA 10, sold for $6,250. Here is the Reverse Holo Lugia from Secret Wonders, sold for $8,600. Here's a BGS 9.5 Gengar EX. from Fire Red Leaf Green, sold for $4,558. Here's the Dialga Level X Black Star promo, sold as a PSA 10 for $12,151 this week. And then lastly on eBay, we have this blister pack of Aquapolis that sold for $2,325. On to the Fanatics Collect weekly auction block, we have this Holo Chimchar from the Pop Series 6. A card I have not seen in PSA 10, sold for $1,620. Here is an unlimited Dark Charizard Holo from Team Rocket, sold as a PSA 10 for $2,760. Here is a CGC 10 Pristine Unlimited Dark Raichu from Team Rocket, sold for $2,760. I guess this is a Pop 1 card as a CGC 10 Pristine. Here is a first edition Pinsir Holo from Jungle in PSA 10, sold for $3,600 this week. Here's the unlimited Holo Gengar from Fossil, sold for $3,720. Here's a CGC 10 Pristine First Edition Dark Blastoise that sold for $5,760. Here is a No Symbol Snorlax Holo from Jungle, sold for $7,500 this week. Here we have an Alt Art Latios GX from Team Up that sold for $8,100. And then here is the first edition Dark Charizard Holo that sold for $8,100 as well. Here's a PSA 10 Crystal Celebi from Skyridge that sold for $8,400. Here is a Mega Rayquaza EX from Roaring Skies that sold for $8,700 as a PSA 10. Here is the Topps Chrome Sparkle Gengar card that sold for $10,800. Here's a CGC 10 Pristine First Edition Base Set Gyarados, sold for $15,600. This is a Pop 2 card. And then we saw the PSA 10 First Edition Base Set Raichu sell for $18,600. And then on to a couple of bangers from alt auctions. Here is the Blastoise EX Full Art promo card from the XY era that sold for $4,572. Here is a Black Label 2009 Japanese promo first place victory medal card that sold for $5,759. Here is a PSA 9 Gold Star Mew that sold for $7,020. Here's another PSA 10 Dark Charizard. This one sold for $7,691. Here is another Black Label Lugia V. We saw one of these come by last week. This week it sold for $8,394. Here we have a PSA 10 Crystal Lugia from Aquapolis. This one here sold for $35,400. Here is a BGS 9.5 1999 Tropical Mega Battle number 2 trainer card that sold for $57,151. And the auction of the week we're going to have to give to this Black Label 2016 20th Anniversary Full Art Pikachu that sold for a whopping $78,000 this week. Folks, what'd you think of these auctions? What do you think of this Kabuto craze going on? It's kind of crazy. Let me know what you think about it all in the comments below. I look forward to hearing from you. That's all I got for you today, and I will catch you all in my next one.